All right, Mark. Mark, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Originally, I was born in Vermont, lived in the South Bronx, moved to Jersey City, and then also lived in the southern part of Jersey. So I'm an East Coast kid originally.
And how was your family? Tell me about mom and dad.
We grew up extremely poor. I had five brothers and two sisters, and we grew up in Richfield, New Jersey. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, immigrated from Ireland, didn't have much work experience and way too many children and not enough money to go around. My father was an accountant in Clark, New Jersey, and just never ever had enough bills to pay. I remember early on as a childhood when we moved out of the South Bronx into Richfield, New Jersey, we lived in a really old house that only my father could afford. And in that house, there was no heat, there was no hot water, and we had to scrummage around and live on food stamps and government subsidies just to be able to eat. In the winter, was freezing in the state of New Jersey, and we had no windows in the house, and there was no heat. And I remember me and my brothers and my sister at the time would just huddle around the little kerosene heater in the living room. And I can remember to this day hearing the click, 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 and hopefully the heat would come on and we'd just huddle around to get through the night. And looking back on it, I remember I was just so afraid that one of my brothers, we'd wake up and somebody wouldn't be alive. We'd maybe shower once every couple of weeks, boil the hot water on the stove and pour it over each other in the shower. And I realized at a young age, I just didn't want my brothers and my sister to go to bed hungry. I was the middle child and always trying to make everybody laugh and make everything okay when everything wasn't okay. And I started at a young age. I would deliver newspapers. I would sell candy bars, whatever I could to raise some money to feed my brother and sister. And we would walk and use our food stamps. And I remember how embarrassing it was. And I was just hoping that there was food on the table. And then my mom and my little brother, Neil, he got sick with seizures, grand mal, petit mal seizures. And my mom had to go to a hospital and spent a long time in the hospital hoping that they would heal my brother. And I lost my mom, not forever, but for a period of time in my life. And I was a mama's boy. I just shadowed my mom. I idolized my mom. And one day I woke up and my mom wasn't there. Nobody explained to me what happened. And I was probably just in about fourth or fifth grade. And that's when I realized I started turning to the street. I started hanging around with older kids. There was a lot of violence and a lot of kids that were rough and bullied and picked on and beat us up. And it was terrible for me. And all I did was just start hustling. And if there wasn't enough food at home, I would go to the local store or the local delicatessen, and I learned how to steal at a young age. But I wasn't stealing to be mischief. I was just stealing because I was hungry. And I wanted to feed my brothers and my sister. So Richfield, New Jersey was really, really tough on me at a young age. And I didn't really know how to process all that. And one day I came home and my mom and my dad said, we're going to move to the southern part of New Jersey because we want to get a better life. And we moved to Toms River, New Jersey to try and discover a better life. And I was probably in about seventh grade. When I left Richfield, New Jersey, I was already into dereliction and troublemaking and running around on the streets and staying out too late and getting caught up with all the bad people. And it just seemed to spill over right into seventh grade. And in seventh grade, I was bullied really bad in school and I was picked on by kids. And I just met a couple older kids and started drinking. Started drinking at a young age, and when drugs were presented, whether it be mescaline or it be weed, I just started smoking weed and started using whatever I could to get out of my normal state of mind. I could look back on it and try and dissect it but I know that I just experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of troubles. My mom wasn't always around. My father was always working. I know that my mom and my dad had a very rough relationship. They were always fighting. And so I couldn't find my way at a young age. And I just tried to stay away from it, but always found myself in trouble. And in 7th and 8th grade, I just really started using drugs. It was the only escape I had from the reality of I didn't want to be in my home. I didn't want to feel the pain. I always looked at everybody else and said, why do they have a good life and why am I so troubled? And I tried my hardest as a young kid just to get along, and I always just never fit in. And I remember smoking weed every day just to cope with going to school, cope with the craziness in my home. My older brother was really hard to deal with. He was beating up my brother. He'd beat up me. I remember witnessing him getting in a fight with my mom, a dragged down fight, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I look back in life today and I just see that a lot of that just spun into a lot of drug usage because I just wanted to escape. I didn't want to feel anymore. I know my parents did the best they could, but at the time it just seemed like my life was just troubled. And everywhere I went and everything that happened at a young age, and that's just too young of an age, and it's just like my childhood was gone. One day I came home and my mom and dad sprung on us that mom was pregnant with the 7th kid and we were going to be moving all the way to California. And I remember telling my mom and my dad, how could you have another kid? I don't understand. You can't even feed us. Why would you bring another kid into the world? And I was so angry at a young age. And I was probably in about 8th grade going into 9th grade, and I was already in trouble. My grades were slipping. And I think my parents just thought it was a good idea to move to California, to be with my dad's only 2 sisters. They were the only family we had on the East Coast. All the other family we had on the West Coast, all the other family we had was on the East Coast. All my cousins, aunts, and uncles, and my mother's family. And when I came to California, that's when I really started getting in trouble. And I remember I was in 9th grade. I met my cousin, which was my father's sister's. She was married to my Uncle Tony, and his daughter, Bella, knew some friends around the corner, and they were really into cocaine. And I tried cocaine, and I really liked the way it felt. It just removed all of my emotions and all of my feelings. And I was in probably about 9th grade, and I got into that culture that they had and the selling drugs and trying to make more money and hustle my way out of where I was at. And sure enough, I got caught in school, and they caught me selling drugs, selling cocaine, caught me with a scale. I was arrested for the first time. I was sent to juvenile hall. I remember going through the whole process of being booked in and how horrifying it was for me, embarrassing, being strip searched, having my mom and my aunt and my uncle, and here we are, we just came out to California and I was already in jail. And my mom got me out, and my mom didn't want to face it. She just didn't want to see it. And it wasn't her fault because she didn't know how to deal with it. And then I had to go through the whole process of school, and I was expelled from school, had to go to court. And I was expelled from Indio High School, and I was off for a whole year, independent studies, trying to work my way back into school. And I tried my hardest, and I went and I did good. I stayed away from the drugs, I stayed away from the people, and I said, that's it, I'm just not going to do this anymore. And so I was allowed back into Palm Desert High School. I had to go to another high school. And I started real good. I was doing great. I was a junior in high school, and I was doing great at a new school. I stayed away from the drugs. I got into sports and athletics, and I've always been in sports and athletics throughout my life, so I loved the game of football, and I just poured my life into football. But at home, I was still troubled. I remember at a young age, I'd be like listening at night, and I would hear my mom crying, and I couldn't understand what it was. And then I realized my father would just drink too much and get into a fight with my mom, and then I would get so upset about it that one day I tried to protect my mom. And I said, "You can't do this no more," to my mom. And I put her behind me, and I remember trying to be the protector of my mom. That's all I wanted to do, was keep my mom safe, and my dad wasn't having it. And at a young age, I think I was maybe 15 or a little after 15, my dad asked me to leave. He threw me out of the house. And I just got in my vehicle. I had a little Blazer. I had a broken leg at the time, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and that was the first time I was ever homeless. And I didn't know what to do. I just slept in the back of my Blazer and hoped nobody would find out at school. And because I was really good on the football team, I think my athletic director kind of knew what was going on, and he just didn't say anything. And the girlfriend I had at the time, her father found out about it, and he decided to reach out and help me. And he let me stay in one of the rooms in their house, as long as I had an agreement that I wouldn't mess with his daughter or do anything at the house. And Tom was a beautiful man. And Angie was my girlfriend at the time. And, I found a home. I just wanted to finish school. I didn't want to drop out, because I knew that the other way of life just wouldn't work. And so they took me into their home, and I was able to get my school under control. Nobody really questioned anything that was going on, and I was really doing good in sports. I really had a chance. I thought, man, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to change my life. I'm not going to be that person. I don't want to fail. I want to win in life. I don't want to fail anymore. And it looked like I was going to be able to play for San Diego State. And then they came to me, and the athletic director came to me at the school and said, CIF is not going to let you play your senior year. And I said, why? If I don't play my senior year, I'm never going to get to college. They said, well, Mark, you got in trouble. You were arrested for selling drugs. And I said, I know, but I stopped. And they said, well, you went on independent studies, and you went too many quarters over. So we're not going to let you play football anymore. And the only way to fight it is if your parents came to the CIF to plead your case. But I didn't want to let them know I wasn't living with my parents. And I was upset at my father, and I was upset at my mom, and I just didn't talk to them. So long story short, nobody ever showed up to talk to the state and to talk to CIF. So they rolled against me, and I couldn't play my senior year. So I gave up on my hopes. I went to work for Angie's father. He had an electrical company, and I went to work as an apprentice. Angie and I got married out of high school, and I just gave up on my dream of playing college football. And I figured it was just right to just go to work. Angie and I had a child together. I was young. I think we were just out of high school, maybe 19, 20 years old. Joshua was his name. And that was my first son. And then everything started falling apart and unraveling at work, because I wanted to leave working with Tom, start my own company, do a little advertising agency. I wanted to be an entrepreneur and get out on my own and do something myself. And that fell apart. I didn't have the experience and the knowledge, but I had the desire. I wanted to be something more in life. I always was striving to be something better. And through that when that business closed and we bankrupted it, I tried to get back and fix the relationship with my father-in-law. And Angie was just falling farther and farther away from me. And I realized in my life, I don't do good with loss, because it reminds me too much of my childhood. And I started drinking heavy again for the first time. And I went and got any job I could, and I was working at Domino's and trying to support my wife and my son. And somebody introduced me to cocaine again. And it wasn't on a massive scale because I don't think my dependency grew that much at that point. Then I came home and Angie told me, look, my mom and dad want to move to Colorado. If you want to see your son and you want to be around him, we need to move to Colorado. And I didn't want to lose my son because I always wanted to be the father to him that I never felt I had, and I wanted to do everything for him that I never had. So we moved all the way out to Colorado. Within 2 to 3 weeks when I got to Colorado, I had nothing but that, and I was living under their roof. I didn't have a job yet, and Angie woke me up and said, you know what? You have to leave. I said, what do you mean? She said, this isn't going to work anymore. And I kissed my son goodbye. I had nowhere to go. I came all the way out here to California. And the family I tried to create, it just went away. I lost it, and I lost my son. And she didn't want anything to do with me. I went out there a couple of times to find her, and she moved. I came back to California. I got introduced to cocaine. I went back to Domino's Pizza, and I got introduced to cocaine, and I just started using for the first time, like just using. Then I couldn't pay for it. Then I found out how to sell it. Then I started selling it and using more, and I gave up my job, and I got with a girlfriend, and then everything just fell apart in my life. It was the first time that I really became chemical dependent on cocaine because I could not deal with the fact that I lost my son. And I started smoking crack for the first time in my life, and I became so dependent. I was 160 pounds, but I didn't want to live, and I couldn't deal with the pain of the loss. And so then I got introduced to methamphetamines, and I started using meth, and I started dealing, and I started doing all the criminal activity that comes along with it. And eventually it caught up to me like everything does. And I was arrested for sales and transportation. And they caught me driving in a car with a trunk full of weed. In the 90s, it was kind of different than it is today. In the 90s, you get caught with drugs and you were going to prison. You were going to prison. And there I sat in jail for the first real time. I was in county jail. And I never forget when the public defender came to me and said, the best I can do for you is 2 years in prison. And my world just stopped. And I couldn't believe that I was facing that. And I never knew growing up that that would be the end result. And I went to prison for the first time in 1992. The first time of many more to come. And I was scared. All these horrible stories you hear about prison, I was scared. I was a young man going to prison. And I went to prison right across from Chino State Prison, California Rehabilitation Center, Hotel California, for my first term. And I did 2 years, and the horrible stories were true. But when I went there, I was so scared. I was just trying to get through and not get caught up. And then back then, there was so much segregation and racism, and there was so much ugliness and riots on the yard, and it just scared me to death. And I paroled. Thank God my mom and dad allowed me to parole to their house. And I paroled with the best intentions. I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going back. That was a horrible experience. But what I didn't realize, how it just kind of shaved away the consequences a little for me, because now I'd already been there. And I tried to get going. I got a great job selling cars. And I thought I found my thing. And then the DMV sent me a letter in the mail and said, once again, can't let you work there. Why? because you were arrested. You were arrested transporting drugs, you can't do it. And then I found myself without a job, found another girlfriend. Then I started to say, okay, well, let me just get another business. Let me try and open a company. Got with a partner to help, do a little entrepreneur endeavor because I was convinced that I would never get a job. I did really good on parole. I never violated my parole. I always tested clean, but the cycle was already starting to unravel. Started a company, started a little vending route. I was doing great. And in my relationship, I started drinking again. And it always starts with a drink. I started drinking again. That relationship fell apart. The business fell apart. And here I was faced again with losing everything one more time. And as I look back in life, I see like every time I'm faced with that and I start losing everything again, here comes the drugs. Here comes the selling of the drugs. Here comes the subculture of living on the street, running around with gangsters and living the outlaw's life. And really, I'm just masking all my pain and just trying to get high because I was just hurting too much to face my life. And once I started getting high and I started using drugs, then nobody wanted anything to do with me. Started running around on the streets one more time and I got caught again for selling drugs. This time I was back in county jail. But what was funny about this time, it was the second time that I was going upstate, and sometimes you're sitting in county jail and you just feel a little relieved that it's over. I'm going to prison one more time. And they gave me another prison term. And I went to prison going, oh my God, here I go again. How did I get here? And it was the drug use. And I went to a little bit of a harder prison this time. Tehachapi State Prison. And I served 2 years. And I got out. And I paroled. And I don't get into all the horrible stories because we all know the horrible stories of prison and the gangs inside and doing everything you can just to stay alive and race riots and horrible things you see and witness. It just burns that into you, and then you just become institutionalized. And after I paroled and I got out on the street, I tried to do good. And then I just gave up easier and quicker this time. And I just said, what's the sense? And I was almost becoming institutionalized without even realizing it. And my second and third term came quick. And the third term again was transporting drugs and selling drugs and the dereliction of it and running it around. I got caught again and I was heading to prison for the third time. And I did a third time in a little bit of a harder prison. And I got out one more time and I paroled and I did good on parole. But in between those 2 prison terms, I never got off parole because I just gave up. And the third time I tried again. And then I was wanted one more time because I ran and I started using drugs and I started getting back with the old people and I started selling drugs and getting in trouble and running around and getting into crime, getting into stealing, dealing with, commercial robberies. And it seemed like every time I just became worse and worse and worse. And then I got my 4th term, which was 5 years. And I looked back and I thought, all those years, 12 years went by and I saw my mom twice. 2 Christmases and that's it. It was just constant, in and out of prison, in and out of prison, in and out of prison. And this last term was in Soledad State Prison, in a cell, in a very hard prison. And I don't even know, I look back and I think, how did I get through all that with all the riots and the violence? And it was 5 tiers high and you can just hear the pain and you could hear the screaming and you could see people being hurt in the riots and the fights and the stabbings and the killings and just all that horrible stuff that I witnessed. I remember one day I was on the yard. We're out there in the main yard and everybody's exercising and working out and doing their pull-ups and push-ups and everybody's segregated and we're using the outdoor restroom. And I'm sitting next to my friend Josh and I'm right here And there's another guy right here. And he says, look out, Mark. And a guy just comes along and just cuts the guy right in the throat. And just that guy ran and he died right there in the yard. And I couldn't believe I'm right in the middle of this. I'm like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And am I going to be able to get home safely? I had no idea where I was going to parole. I had no idea. And my sister Carol just was a unicorn at that time and said, parole to my house. And when I got out, I paroled to the house, and I thought I would go to the higher desert, Victorville, Barstow area. Maybe a geographical change would do me good. And I went to college. I went to junior college, and I tried to finish the dream I originally had as a young man. And sure enough, right there at college, somebody offered me drugs, and I started using drugs again. And the whole spiral happened again. And I wound up moving back down to the desert to get with all the old friends and get in trouble one more time. And that's when I really started experiencing homelessness myself, because nobody wanted anything to do with me. My drug addiction had taken over. My alcoholism had taken over. In 2009, I found myself living underneath a bridge. Jackson Street Bridge. And I had a broken foot. I broke my hand trying to defend myself, getting in fights and all the stuff that goes on with the homeless community. And there was a little alcoves, little cutouts underneath the bridge. So you could just go up there and just sleep at night. And there I was, homeless. And I come from a good family. You know, my brothers and sisters are very successful. They all have good careers. And I had a troubled youth, but there's more trouble out there that people experience. And there was no understanding. I was homeless, under a bridge, and I had nowhere to go. Walking around the city streets of Indio, I was arrested one more time. And in jail, a guy wrote me a little note, and he said, you have two problems, Mark. You need to end your homelessness, and you need to find your way, find God, do something, Mark. You have to change your way. I remember coming out of jail. It was hot. My foot was broken. I had no shoes, no socks. I looked at this little map. I looked to the left, and I saw the liquor store. I knew where the friends were. There was a little map to a rescue mission. And I said, man, I got to change. And that was the first time that I really, really felt that I needed to change, or I wouldn't live anymore. So I walked all the way down there, and I had to stop every time my foot was hurting. And I went to that rescue mission, and I experienced recovery for the first time. And I lived in that overnight shelter, and I didn't want to leave, no matter what. But all of my past caught up to me. I got a warrant. I was in a high-speed chase. I ran from the police. They had me on a warrant for a 459 commercial burglary, and I had to go to court and face criminal charges one more time. But instead of sending me to prison for the 5th time, the judge decided to give me a court-ordered program called drug court. And I really started to understand what recovery was. And I really believed I started believing in myself again. I started saying, okay, well, that's my life, but it doesn't have to be my tomorrow. You know, your past doesn't dictate your future. And I tried my hardest, and I found a home there at the rescue mission in Indio. And I was exposed to other people. And as I grew in my sobriety, and I had to go through all these court cases, and I had to fight my way out of it, and go to Prop 36 and DUI classes and drug court, and exposed to AA meetings and church. And I started realizing there's more to it. And then I remember helping one person that was homeless, and encouraging them. And somehow it made me feel a little bit better. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what was going on at the time, but I shared a little bit of my story, and I was able to say, you know what, I've been there. And it encouraged him to stay. And I started making more friends, and then I realized, wait a minute here. That kind of makes me feel a little bit good or better about myself, that maybe all the things that I did in my life wasn't so horrible. And that was my first exposure to just helping another person. And they just found a way to keep me there. They gave me a part-time cook job. I just started cooking food for the homeless. So we'd make pizzas on the weekends, and it made me feel good. And then I worked at a gas station, and I graduated the program. And then I started working in the overnight shelter. And I went there to get help. I just needed a place to stay. I didn't realize that along the way and in my journey, I would find something to do. And I found employment there. And then we went from the small mission to a really big mission next door. And we had a real big building. We raised the money for it. And we moved from that old little mission. And I always stayed around the mission. They always found a reason for me to stay there. And I started working with the homeless population in 2009, 2010 was a lot different than it is today. And so we just started working with them. I graduated the program. I started really doing good. I found my girlfriend, Frances, who's my wife today. And I moved out successfully. And she came home one day and said, "I'm pregnant." And I couldn't believe it, because after I lost Joshua at a young age, I promised myself I would never have a kid again, because I never wanted to experience that loss. And so moving forward, I was clean and sober, and I was doing good, and I had year after year after year of sobriety. I went back to school to study it, to be able to help people more, and I loved what I did working. And I worked in the emergency shelter. I worked with guys in the program. Frances and I, we had our son, and one of the most hardest points of that whole pregnancy was finding out that my son had a birth defect, that he had gastrosthesis, and all of his intestines were on the outside of his body. But we had our son. He made it through, little Mark Jr. And fast forwarding it to like 2015, 13, 14, and 15 was really good. We had our own place. Everything was going well. And then Frances and I just were not getting along, and we had problems, and we split up. And looking back, that was what was starting to trigger myself to unravel. And everything I saw went right out the door one more time. And Frances and I separated, and my son went with her. I didn't use at the time. I didn't relapse. I didn't start drinking again. I just kept working and trying to create a life that would be understandable, and then have another girlfriend, and just hopefully that just never worked out. And we just separated, and we went our own separate way. And I didn't realize it then, but my ego and my pride and my work was becoming my identity. And I was slipping in so many ways that my life was spiraling out of control one more time with the separation of my wife. I was slacking on my job. I was becoming bigger than myself, and I had no humility. And so roughly around 2015, my job came to an end. I went to work one day. They terminated my position and let me go all of a sudden. All of a sudden, they let me go. I'm at 8 years of sobriety. 8 years. I just bought a house. I bought a house because I believed that my family would come back together someday, and my kids would have a home to grow up in, and wouldn't have to go through what I went through as a child one more time. Losing the house, getting evicted, not having a place to call home. So I thought that I'm going to get this home, and that somehow my family's going to come back together. But the loss of my job, the loss of my identity, I was not processing things correctly. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped doing everything that kept me clean and sober for that entire 8 years. I just bought a new truck. Everything was going great. I drive to AM PM to put gas in my car. I walk in the store I look to the right and there's the beer aisle. And I walk over, I open the door and I grab two 40-ounce beers. 8 years of sobriety. 8 years of sobriety. I sat in my car and I drank the first one. And I thought to myself, what did I just do? I just lost 8 years of sobriety. And I just said, the heck with it. And I drank the other one. And I went home and I just started drinking. All over again. Everything just went right out the window. Within 2 to 3 weeks, I was introduced to somebody around the corner that had methamphetamines. They said, hey, do you want some? And I knew the answer. I knew what to do. So I started smoking methamphetamines one more time. And all of the guilt, all of the shame, all the hiding from everybody, because I didn't want anybody to know that I slipped and I relapsed. I'm drinking and using. After spending all those years working with so many people and having my life together, now I was right back to where I was in 2009. But I wasn't able to stop. Once I took that drink, once I was drunk, once I was loaded on drugs, I could not stop. And in 2015, 2016, I relapsed. And it just became absolutely horrible. I went right back to all the old guys I used to traffic drugs for and sell drugs for. I couldn't get high anymore. And then I started using heroin because the guilt, the shame, the hard times I had, once I used heroin for the first time, everything went away. All my pain, everything went away. So now I'm on heroin, I'm on meth, I'm on alcohol, the expense of it all. I start selling drugs to pay for my habit. I ran out of all my money. I'm not making any payments on my house, on my car, on the water bill, nothing. I am hanging around horrible people, gang members, troublemakers, the underground, the whole subculture of selling drugs, using drugs, white-collared crimes, credit card fraud, selling stolen stuff, breaking into places, stealing, getting involved with that whole network of criminals where you're stealing stuff to get high and they're stealing your stuff to get high, dealing with all kinds of drugs. And the whole time, all I'm doing is every now and then I have a moment of clarity where I go, man, what am I doing? But I just can't stop. I just can't quit. I tried a couple times to quit on my own. A good friend of mine, Troy, who's my coach, who's a dear friend, was my coach in life when I was at my last couple years at the mission and working at the mission, knew that I relapsed, but I was too embarrassed to tell him. I didn't want to talk to him. I was so angry at him because I blamed him. I blamed the mission. I blamed everybody for my relapse. I remember one time he called me and I was so mad at him. I was yelling at the phone and I wasn't mad at him. I was mad at myself. I threw the phone out the window. And Troy has got tenacity and he just would not stop. He'd find my new phone number and he'd keep trying, but I didn't want to listen to him. Did not want to listen to Troy. I wasn't ready to stop drinking and using. Along with my drinking and using came, I got arrested in my front yard. They found drugs in my car. I was being watched by the police. I got in terrible accidents. I remember one time I was driving down the street at 45 miles an hour on Jefferson and I fell asleep. I hit the back of a truck, totaled the truck, ran from the police. They found me. I got arrested. That's twice. I bailed out. I'm selling drugs. I'm doing everything that is 100% wrong. Everything that I stood for went right out the window in order to get high. I tried getting sober. I couldn't get sober. I knew that everything was coming to a close. When I got loaded and I got drunk one more time, I remember telling Frances, my wife, I said, Frances, please don't come around me. Please don't come around me. I'm no good. I'm selling drugs. I'm a horrible person. And I don't want you or the kids to see me loaded. Because she never did. The whole time we were together, we were sober. She never saw a drunken loaded Mark. Never. And I remember one day the knock came at the door. I'm like, who's there? And she said, it's Frances. And I said, you have to go away. And she said, no. But I was so full of shame because of all the horrible stuff I was into. I didn't want her to see me. I couldn't open the door. And she sat outside for 6 or 8 hours. And I told her, please just go away, Frances. Leave me alone. I'm no good. Just let me die. Let me just stay away from me. And she said, I'm not leaving. You're the man I love and you're the man I married. And that was like getting close to the end of my relapse because I was out there for like 14 months. And everything, I lost everything. I totaled every car. I've stolen. I've broken into places. I've sold drugs. I've hung around the most horrible people. And everything was coming to a close so fast. And I let her in. And she said, I don't get it. I said, I relapsed. I've been doing everything wrong and I don't know how to stop. And she tried with the best of her intentions to try, but I wasn't listening. And I would like to say, hey, everything stopped and I got clean and sober and everything came back together and everything was wonderful, warm and fuzzy, but it wasn't. I did not stop. I was chemically dependent at that time on heroin, meth, and alcohol, and I needed to get high every day to feel well and to be able to get through my day. And then all of the horrible people started coming around. I got in trouble again. I got arrested one more time. The police were closing in on me. I was in circles of drug traffickers, drug dealers, gang members. I was trying to go all the way to San Diego and move drugs just to be able to get caught up. In my mind, I was thinking, I just need to get caught up, get ahead, and then I'll go get help. I don't want to lose my house. I don't want to lose the last thing I have in this world. I just don't want to lose anything more. I'm tired of losing my whole life. That's all I ever felt like. I was just, everything I had, everything that ever mattered to me, I always lost, no matter what. I remember coming back all the way from San Diego and I was driving all the way down Highway 74. I fell asleep. I caught a nod. I woke up and I was driving right off of 74. And I drove right off of 74. Airbags deployed, hit me. I went off of 74. 2 rocks kept my vehicle from going all the way down. I kicked the door open. I climbed all the way back up. I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to go to the hospital. I'm drunk. I'm loaded. I have drugs on me all the time, 24 hours a day. I hitchhiked all the way home, got home, and what did I do? I continued to get high. I was just out there. No matter what happened, all the horrible stuff, all the arrows pointing that I needed to stop drinking, I needed to stop using, and I still didn't. I still did not. And then I started getting into guns, and then I started having guns around the house, and then I figured, okay, well, let's just sell guns, let's sell drugs, let's do whatever we had to have money. Everything was just falling apart. I had so many horrible people around me. I just didn't even know what to do, so I just kept using and consuming drugs and getting farther and farther and farther behind. I had a wonderful idea. I look back and I think, what was I thinking at the time? Somebody else said, hey, let's just go rob this store over here, Verizon, and we can get some phones and we can get caught up and spend money. And then we hatched this plan. We cut through the wall and we went to rob a Verizon store. The alarms went off. We didn't get caught right then and there. But obviously they have cameras. They knew who did it. I'm driving. I'm leaving my house. I'm going down the street and the cops swarm on me. And they catch me with drugs and needles and hypodermic needles in my car and they arrest me one more time. This is coming to the back end of my relapse. I get out on bail. I go home. What's the first thing I do? I get high some more. I cannot stop using. I just keep using. I keep smashing down the pain. So I've spoken about Troy before, and I have a life coach that really believes in self-care, really believes in working out and taking care of yourself. And back then I didn't quite grasp the concept as I do today. And one time we were hiking on the bump and grind. And it's a big mountain that everybody calls a bump and grind, and we're hiking and we're coming down this mountain. And this is before I lost my job. Troy turned to me and he said, Mark, I don't know anything about this drug stuff. I don't know. I've never done it. I have no idea. I'm totally admit. I have no idea. But what if, Mark? I said, what if? What do you mean? What if you were ever to relapse? What should I do? I said, I'm never going to relapse. There's no way. My ego and pride was in the way. And sure enough, at the end, I get a call from Troy. I go, hello, this is Troy. I go, I don't know a Troy. Here, talk to this guy. He gives the phone back. He goes, Mark, you don't know me? And I said, hi, Troy. I know you. I'm just too full of shame and I'm embarrassed. And Troy started just talking to me a little bit. But then again, I just kept on using. I did not want to stop. I didn't want to stop. Francis started coming around more with the kids. I started trying to stop. I started to try to have my family back together with my stepdaughter, Ellie and Junior and Francis, and everything got bad. I just couldn't stop drinking. I was getting angry at her. We were fighting. We were having all kinds of problems. The house was extremely risky with a lot of dangerous people around. And one day Troy came. He came all the way from Oregon. And he said, I said, Troy, why are you here? Look at me. Look at what I've become. Look at my life is a ruin. I ruined everything. I threw everything away, Troy. He goes, I go, why are you here? And he said, Mark, do you remember when we were hiking that day? I said, yeah. He goes, I made you a promise. And I'm here to live up to my word. I promised you I would come down here. And he was there. And he took me out back. He said, you know what, Mark, this isn't you. This is a drug-induced, alcohol-ridden Mark, but it's not who you are. You have to stop. Go somewhere and find help. And I would like to see right then and there, everything stopped. And I got well, but I did not. And everything happened quickly within 2 weeks. And then one night, I was drinking and I was using. And it felt like my life was out of control. It felt like I didn't want to live anymore. And I had a loaded 45 on my bureau and I had a bottle of whiskey. And I was up for way too long. And I just wanted to end my life. I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't want to deal with the guilt, the shame, the worry, the frustration. I'm 48 years old and I'm just a loser. I lost everything. And I remember I had my Bible, I had a Alcoholics Anonymous book, and I was trying to read. I was trying to change my life. I was trying to pull out of it. And I flipped through the pages of the Bible and my son's picture came out. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't leave my son alone. I can't. I won't leave him without a father. And I would like to say everything ended right there for me. And all I could say was, God help me. And I finally fell asleep. And when I woke up, I got all that stuff out of the house. Troy came back around and said, man, we need to help you, Mark. You need to change. I said, but I lost everything. I lost Why does it matter, Troy? He said, because you're better than this. And then everything started rolling fast. And he said, you go anywhere, Mark. You go anywhere and you can get into any detox. You tell them to call me and I'll pay the bill. You got to change, Mark. And then Troy worked with a friend of mine from the county that helped me get into a detox. And Troy said, Mark, on this day at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to be in your driveway. And you need to be there. And you need to get in my car at 10. And we're going to go get you help. And if you're not there, we're done. Don't call me and I'm not going to call you again. And unfortunately, there was a holiday. It was a holiday. So I had to wait like 3 or 4 more days because the treatment center didn't have an available bed. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. And I kept using. I kept getting high. And I remember the day before, the night before, as crazy as my mind was, I didn't even know what day it was. And the night before, I went to score some drugs, and on the way home, we got chased. The police went to pull us over, and I thought to myself, don't pull the car over. I have to go to treatment in the morning. Don't pull over. And we ran. And we ran from the police. And we got caught in the sand dunes. And I jumped out, and I just started running. I just started running and running and running and running. And I was so scared, and I knew it was getting late at night, and I had to get home. I walked through the desert. I mean, all the way through the desert. Hitchhiked rides, walked home. I got home at like maybe 7 in the morning, and Francis was there, and I said, Francis, please, don't let me fall asleep because I won't wake up for Troy. And sure enough, 10 o'clock came, and I don't know what it was. Like, I just knew that if I did not get help, I would never live. I would never live. I couldn't get through it anymore. I had all these court cases. I had the police at both sides of my block watching every move I made. It was horrible. I'd never, ever experienced so much pain in my life. I fell asleep, but I woke up in time. But I was still sick as a dog off the drugs. I was sick. And I remember getting high, and I was so embarrassed to tell Troy. And I just got as high as I could just to get through the day. And I remember looking at Francis, and the kids were there, and I just said, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. But I'm going to make this right. Somehow I'm going to make this right. And I just threw clothes, grabbed my bag. And when I walked out of my house, I knew right there I would never see my home again, and I would lose everything, but I didn't care because I didn't want to lose my life. I was done. And I got in that car with Troy, and we went over to a county building, and they had to do all the assessments. And I couldn't even think. I was so clouded with all the detox and the horrible feelings I had, and everything I was going through was just terrible. They were asking me questions. I didn't even understand what they were saying to me. And they just hurried me up and they said, go to the ranch. Go to detox, Mark. And I got in the car, and I remember I couldn't even peel an orange that he gave me to eat. I was so distorted. And that's where the journey of my recovery began. I decided right then I needed to live. I didn't want to die. And Troy was that person that just kept trying and kept trying and kept trying. And I listened. I heard that voice inside of me that said, man, you got to get help, Mark. You got to stop what you're doing. And I went to detox. And again, I'd like to say like, oh, everything was wonderful, but it wasn't. It was a horrible detox. It was 10 days. And I was shaking and I was hurting, and I just wouldn't accept anything. I wouldn't accept no drugs. I said I didn't come here to get on off. I came here to get off of drugs, not on different drugs. So I did everything cold turkey. And then you wake up the next morning, or the second or the third morning, and you start facing reality. all the pain of everything you did, the guilt, the shame, the loss, everything I did came to light. And I was like, I could not even believe all the horrible stuff I did. Could not even believe it. My hand, I hurt my hand right here with a machete, because on when I was high, I thought, oh, well, this is great. Let's go chop down some weed plants and let's make some money. I slipped and I fell and I cut my finger, almost cut my fingers off. So my hand was killing me. And I was hurting and I was coming off all the drugs. And I remember all the hallucinations. I was sweating and I couldn't eat. I was taking hot showers back and forth to the nurse. But when the second, the third, and the fourth day came, I started just taking a deep breath. And that's where my recovery started again. And that was on January 15th, 2018. That was my first day sober again after 14 months of my relapse. 14 months. And the most difficult thing for me was I didn't know where my wife and kids were. Because Troy, he didn't tell me because the kids were unsafe at the house and Francis was unsafe. And so I didn't know for the first 30 days where my children were. But I just knew that I had to stay there, man. I had to get back into recovery. And what's funny is, like, I knew right then and there, I said in the beginning, I said, I'm never going to go back. I'm never going to help people again. I'm done. 8 years I served people and I counseled, and I just was so mad at myself. I felt like such a failure. I felt like I just let everybody down and I was just done. And as that journey of recovery began, and I started helping people again, I felt that need, like I felt that desire to help people. And all the other things came into play. My house was being foreclosed on and we needed to sell it. I had all kinds of debt. The person that I hit when I fell asleep in the car was suing me. And then I had all my court issues. I had 3 court cases and it wasn't looking good because I have a lifelong of prison. I have a 14-page rap sheet. I have like 15, 16 felonies. There's no way that I'm going to get any mercy in the courts. But I knew that I had to go to court. And I remember going to court for the first time. And the judge looked down at me and the DA looked over and he said, "Is that Mark McGowan?" And they said, "Yes." And I remember what they said. "What happened to him?" Because I used to go to court and people, they'd be released to my custody because they knew we were doing good work to help people. So I'm at the ranch and I'm working through it and I'm getting on my 30th day. Then they have a center go up there and test, and then I find out I have hepatitis C from dirty needles, exchanging needles. I contracted hepatitis C, so I had to go through hepatitis C liver treatment. I got on through my treatment phase, moved to a sober living house. Then I realized I had to have reconstructive surgery on my hand from the accident I had. And I was in that rehab, and I was in the sober living, and things were starting to come back together. But there's one story that I forgot to mention was right at 30 days. 30 days you're allowed to have visits. And I get called up to the main office. And I still don't know where my kids are. I still don't know where my wife is. And in walks Francis. And there's my son. And he just dropped this little tablet and ran over and hugged me. And that just made it all better. And Ellie was there and Junior, and we had a visit. And for the first time, I realized I was clean and sober again. And what was most important in life is your family, is my wife and kids. And she never left. She just hung with me and stayed with me through the whole time. She never left. And we went through a lot of processes there at the rehab, and then we got into a family program so we can get our children the help they needed. As I moved through and I phased up, and I'm still going to court, and I'm kind of fast forwarding through it, and I'm moving into another sober living house called the Noah House, where I'm living, and it's sponsored by my old place, the Coachella Valley Rescue Mission. And That's where Francis went to live while I was in treatment because they had no choice. And it was hard for me because it was where I used to work, to know that my family had to go there for protection and safety. And all of this was happening sometimes very slowly and sometimes very quickly. And this was all in my first year of recovery. My first 6 months of recovery was nothing but court appointments and surgeries and treatment and rehabilitation. And I just kept on saying, no matter what, I'm not going to leave. No matter what, I'm not going back. And Troy was in my life more, and he was working on more things, and I was getting back into self-care, and I was starting to become alive again. And that happens over time because you lose your way, you lose your soul, you lose who you are, and that's what drugs and alcohol do to people. And it just gets you into this small subculture of a world that when you come out of it, it takes time. It takes time for you to come back around, and you need to have a lot of support around you. And I'm just grateful for Troy because I wanted to say this before, is that when you're working with somebody like Troy, I must have said no to Troy 12 times. But did that stop him? No, and he never gave up. I always tell people, don't give up on somebody. You never want to give up hope. You never want to stop calling somebody, because you never know when this one time you meet with that person and you may say the right thing and they might be going through the right experience and it just connects and they go, you know what, I want to change. And they do change. And sometimes we do change and sometimes we don't. But my story is just about change at the right time. But Troy never ever gave up on me. And that's one thing I want to let people know is don't give up on people that you're working with, because nobody ever knows what it's going to take or how is it going to take it. Every individual is different. But if you have a love for somebody or a care for another human being, always just keep trying. Don't ever give up.